Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 Night Owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org. Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 400 high-level participants will gather from more than 80 countries to delve into this year's theme, a more assertive Atlantic, its meaning for the world. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 Night Owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org. Under the high patronage
Thank you for your patience. The 6th plenary session will now begin.
Organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin. In the contemporary global political landscape, the dynamics of authoritarianism, democracy, and populism are undergoing significant shifts, impacting both the southern and northern hemispheres. Authoritarian resurgence challenges democratic foundations, and populist sentiments test traditional norms globally. Leaders recalibrate alliances, reshaping international relations beyond regional boundaries. Is this shift toward authoritarianism a temporary deviation or a lasting departure from democratic principles, transcending geographical boundaries? Does the evolving discourse signify the exhaustion of the democratic model, encompassing authoritarian aspects? And, amidst the spread of disinformation and populist narratives, what measures can be implemented to safeguard the integrity of information, foster informed citizenry, and enhance resilience against manipulative influences?
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage the moderator of the 6th plenary session, moderator, presenter, and journalist Ali Aslan.
Thank you so much for this very kind introduction. As you all know, or probably most of you here in this audience, we had a very lively, if not contentious discussion yesterday on this very stage on multilateralism, and the following debates will be no exception when it comes to the nature of timeliness, when it comes to controversy, and when it comes to the urgency, namely authoritarianism, democracy, and populism today. It couldn't be more urgent and timely, and for that, I'm very grateful to be joined by 3 highly accomplished individuals who will help shed light on the intricacies and challenges that many democracies these days are facing. First up, of course, he needs very little introduction. He is one of France's leading specialists in international relations and was, of course, the former French foreign minister from 1995 to 2002. Please welcome Hubert Védrine. Right here, former minister, good to have you back. Very much looking forward to the discussion. Please, right next to me. Next up, she is a former Minister of State for Women's Affairs in Chile. She's currently the director of the National Oil Company of Chile. Please welcome Laura Albornoz. Please. And last but certainly not least, he's a former vice president at the World Bank Group, a former director of the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, and a professor at my alma mater, Columbia University. Mats Karlsson, ladies and gentlemen. Mats, good to have you back, and good to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, authoritarianism, democracy, and populism today, certainly very fierce, very contested, but very timely issue. Hubert Védrine, former minister, the rise of authoritarianism within many liberal democracies is truly troublesome and worrisome. We could throw out the names, of course, the usual suspects: Donald Trump, Viktor Orban. We can talk about Farage in the UK, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines. Now, Argentina, of course, with its new president, the AfD in Germany, Modi Village. It would take up most of the time of this panel. But more importantly, I'm interested in your assessment. Why you think many liberal democracies are succumbing or voting for authoritarian leaders?
Alors, est-ce que le son est bon?
Is the sound okay? Es un tema muy...
Ma première idée, c'est qu'il y a une gigantesque crise dans les démocraties.
Bueno, the fact of saying that it's because of Putin or it's Putin's fault that consolidates the moral approach, but it doesn't erase the internal question. The elites in general.
Quand les peuples ne votent pas comme il faut.
That is the actual definition of populism, sorry. But there is no actual definition of populism, because in all democracies you have to listen to the voters. When you talk about populism, it's when the people actually kind of challenge the decision-making process. So if the people challenge the deregulation and the accelerated European development, you hear talking about populism. So I want to say here there is no whatsoever definition of populism in all countries of the world. There are people, except in Monaco, there is no population risk. But everywhere else, it's a matter of degree. The liberal democracy or illegal democracy or populism. So I'd like to maybe propose a much more subtle approach if you want to contain the phenomena.
Generally and globally accepted definition of populism, you're right, of course, and we'll dive much deeper as the discussion unfolds about the various distinctive characteristics of each country, of course. But let me turn to Laura for now. Laura, it's good to have you. You also were in politics for a while. You are now in the private sector. But also the same question to you. Obviously, populism is not a phenomenon. Authoritarianism is not an element that is restricted to a geography or let alone to a country. It is global, South and Central America not being exempted. How do you explain this phenomenon? The translator's hurrying up probably, trying to catch up with my words.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Actualmente soy directora de una empresa pública en Chile.
Well, I work for a public company in Chile that processes oil and gas. I have never worked in the private sector because since my time as a Minister of State, working for Michelle Bachelet, I have always working in the public sphere, but I do have the impression that there is a dichotomy before the will of the people and the elites that leads to the uprising of populist ideas, of populist governments. There are very many factors, as the minister just said, behind, in the background. And in my view, the most important of these, part of the awakening of the democratic institutions, is not corruption, in my view, as a phenomenon that generates a chain reaction among the people, such as the Latin American people and the Global South people who are still lacking many things in their well-being. So the rising of new leaders with a special charisma, leaders who oppose the democratic models or who somewhat put it down by using the democratic institutions, makes populism, or this clash between the elites and the people, gets its way as a way of making politics. And I'm talking both right-wing and left-wing. They have now settled in Europe, but also in other countries who have been taking this European colonialism recently.
Not an issue of right or left. Quite on the contrary, you find spectrums of populism on both sides. But Mats, the interesting thing that we're seeing worldwide is, of course, that populists are seeking and achieving power by democratic means, first and foremost, and then make the countries they govern rather less democratic, or rather undermine the democratic values, foundations, and ideal. That's new, isn't it?
That might not be absolutely new. We saw it in the 30s as well. So I think...
Since then?
Well, but the point is we are susceptible to this. And if we don't stand up for democracy and absolutely argue that we're not living in a world of gray nuances here, we have to fight for democracy against autocrats. It's true what has been said of nuancing populism. Even in American parlance, populists are Democrats. So we have different nuances in languages. But I think we have to put it very clearly that unless we stand for democracy, we are not going to retain our institutions, human rights, the rule of law, and we are living in a very dangerous moment, because as we even heard over the hours past here, there is actually a kind of an apologetic approach to, let's say, China or let's say Russia, and we can't have it. It has to be crystal clear. And if we want an Atlantic idea here, the idea could actually be built around democracy, because I think all of the countries, more or less, that are part of the Atlantic dialogues have democracy as a tradition somewhere, and we need to strengthen it. And we should be very afraid if the United States elects Donald Trump. It could happen. So we need to be on the alert.
Yeah, we certainly do. But former minister, if we're looking at the trend, many people are saying, yes, of course it is worrisome. It is a worrisome trend, something that we need to be highly alert about. But many people are also trying to explain the phenomenon by saying this is also a failure of the traditional parties that we're seeing, the leaders, that democracies does not deliver these days. Liberal democracies no longer seem to be capable of providing the solutions to many challenges, at least on the surface. of it, making people, of course, be much more susceptible to then turn to those who provide very simple answers and solutions to extremely complicated questions.
Oui, oui, c'est une bonne question, mais j'en profite pour préciser.
This is a great question, but let me say that when I'm talking about a major internal crisis, this is the rejection of the representative democracy. In all countries in the world, we have invented democracy, or in all the countries that you had two chambers, right? And you had mechanisms to cool down the political decision. So you had people having a mandate, we let them work, and then we will judge them and assess them at the end of the day. But this is over. Now we are in a system, thanks to the technical reality that everyone knows. We elect someone on Sunday, and you start demolishing the same one you have elected on Monday. So it's very difficult to imagine a modern democracy. It's something internal, I would say. It's very complicated to reinvent the art of governing democracy by listening to the needs of the people whilst keeping a certain equilibrium. This is absolutely impossible. So you have a lot of democracies or rulers that try to calm down the most excited parts of the opinion. There is a form of atomization, of radicalization, not to mention countries that are lagging behind, and this, you add to this the response to democracy to all this. So there's no reason to be surprised. And when people vote, they vote because they reject. They're not voting against globalization because that was too fast or maybe too quick. They don't like Europe because they don't like what Europe is doing. And the indignation of elites, or the anxiety of elites, or panic of elite, has no whatsoever effect. I'm talking about this internal crisis that we need to apprehend and address. I don't think that the current world is defined by a giant confrontation between democracy and authoritarian regimes. It's much more complicated than that. And if we go from that reflection, we don't go anywhere. So a lot of countries are in between. So this is a vision that is morally quite estimable, but it's not working well. And it is actually put forward by Western European elites or part of the American elites, kind of hostile countries. So I want to address this with cooler mindset and try to look at the external sources and of course, look at the reasons why people have voted for the right wing in Argentina. So I'm not trying to globalize the problem. The more you globalize, the more binary and the less solutions you have.
Helpful in that regard, you're right. But Laura, it is a global phenomenon nonetheless. As we said, it does not stop at boundaries. It does not stop with certain cultures, certain continents. It is there. And once again, let me rephrase the question about the failure on the part of what we would call traditional parties, traditional politicians, that are in many ways perhaps failing to address the many challenges that we're facing today: rise of inequality, stream of refugees, you name it, you go down the list. All the issues that are triggering a response from a population that wants answers and wants actions, and therefore is turning to so-called rebel rousers who are using a much more stern, direct language towards the public.
Well, democracies are not doing what you are doing this evening. Relating to three people speaking different languages, democracies have not been able to adapt to changes, including those who are never included, changing the style, how to understand democracy, including women in a sector and an area where they have never been included, and all the sectors and groups of the population, migrants, people from indigenous origins, or the LGBTQ plus community and others. I believe that indeed democracies, the table where democracy is sitting, is lacking a leg, and we have failed, we, the political elite, to adapt to that lack. We have been making efforts permanently in order to change leaderships, to promote new ways of relating to one another, but they have not been successful. And one example of this is what happens in my country. We have a referendum coming up on Sunday to determine for the second time whether we agree with the new constitution in the country or not. And we have not been able to reach an agreement. We have not been able to have an agreement, and this shows the weakening of our social capacity. And part of this is the responsibility of the political elites. Also, it is the responsibility of the people, but I think the main responsibility falls on the shoulders of the traditional political parties. And I am saying this after coming from being part of a very important political party in Chile, who are not quite capable to adapt to current times and see what the environmental needs are, things like climate change, responding to hydro and power problems. I think we have been blind to a certain extent, and that this space has been taken up by new actors, new stakeholders who speak short but sweet. And I think they speak directly to the people, and that makes it easier for them. They resort to Twitter, Instagram. It is now easier to communicate. They don't go so deep in their messages, but on the other hand, there is the academia that needs to provide the fundamentals of the democratic systems. I think we have also neglected the role of being more powerful on reinforcing democracies as a governance mechanism, as we believe it is the most optimum.
On the part of traditional parties and politicians have created a vacuum that obviously politicians such as Donald Trump or Viktor Orban or Duterte have been all too happy to fill with their point of view and worlds. But Mats, the truth is, now, we can dismiss such reactions on the part, feeling left behind, on the part of the people, feeling disenfranchised, feeling left behind, with rising equality. We can dismiss these reactions as irrational or perhaps even small-minded, but many people feel them nonetheless, so they have to be addressed, and if politicians don't address them, someone will.
Absolutely, and we should not, certainly I'm not taking it lightly, but if I want to put the weight on the other side of the leg, it is because unless we Democrats defend democracy, we are going to be perceived as weak. And that will then confuse people, and then we lose territory. So I think it's about time to stand up. Of course, many of us, I worked both in government and in institutions, was so hopeful from the middle of the 90s, the 2000s, and so on. Of course, we had a blind spot at the time. We thought that things would just go well, and we built institutions, we built international law, we drove down poverty. Globalization was a clear positive factor. Democratization took its space in the world. But there were things we didn't see. Okay, but we have analyzed that for more than 10 years now. So it's about time to put the keel straight and say that the international system is built on law and human rights, and it is democracy that has built these institutions, cared for them, fight for truth, and has given more space for not just many countries, non-traditional democracies, but within countries, create a better democratic culture. And unless, if we, who are Democrats, keep saying, oh, we don't know, and well, we're going to look like wishy-washy. Democracy is the future of the world. That's how you handle conflicting interests. That's how you create a new South. In fact, I like the term New South much better than the global South, which mixes terms and relations in a complicated geopolitical and geoeconomic world. But the New South is an inspiring democratic aspiration.
Democracy, former Minister Mats is saying, democracy is the future, obviously something that we would like to believe in. But my question to you is, as somebody who's been part of the political establishment, the sentiments of, I drive it home again, the sentiments of being left behind, an anxiety of status, a personal sentiment of decline is being created and exploited. This climate of resentment and envy that we're seeing globally, is that being taken serious sufficiently by the political establishment?
Alors, d'abord, si vous permettez.
If I may, I think that we would exaggerate to say that these democracies have failed. Well, simply because it's impossible. And the modern democracies are not based on citizenship, but on systematic individualization, atomization of everything, which is typical from the societal movement, which is different from the social movement. They haven't really failed. Because they have witnessed a rebirth. The New South or the Global South doesn't want to live under the auspices or the pressure of the Westerners. And most of the world population wants to live the Western way, a minimum of security, way of life, and standard of living. So we cannot address all the needs or requests, contradictory requests of the social groups. No government can manage this. You can pretend for a couple of years, but it doesn't work. So you should not interiorize the idea of this terrible failure. And as I said, the left-wing parties are exalted between the classical approach, former communist approach, and the societal approach that is individualistic. It's one group. It is not the same. And these are currents that are very difficult to match and conciliate. And it challenges the global democratic process. I do not believe, on the other hand, that we are in the 30s. I do not like this comparison. This is maybe a false diagnosis, and it will come and bring about remedies that don't work. So I am much in favor of a much more pragmatic way of solutions. So we are not in a binary debate. Now, as for responsibility of the rulers, so we need to understand what it's all about. So look at the ecological and environmental question between those who want to really speed up and scale up and those who don't want to move. They don't have the same interests. We have the feeling that COP28 the COP is the only good thing for years, because this is the only good dynamics that has been found. So we should not be desperate about all this global approach. So we don't want to go into an environmentalization movement that will be too fast. And I will close by saying that the West, blaming the West, the missionary West does no longer work, or proselytism. So we need to forget about this idea. The whole world will find its own values. And as the West is constructed and built, given its historical and philosophical background, the proselytism, endurance, the feeling of missionary approach is very difficult to integrate this West that will promote its way of life.
And the point that you're making about not generalizing, but still, the question remains, of course, Laura, one thing that these so-called populist leaders have in common, they're very good at creating, or rather presenting, an adversary, an enemy. For some, it's on the left and right, depending on whom we're talking about. For some, it's immigrants, some it's the press, minority. For some, it's the global elite or the top 1%. And in doing so, of course, they are dividing the world between friends and enemies, creating very highly polarized and fragmented societies. That is one thing in common that they all have. That is a very worrisome trend, isn't it?
Sí.
Yes, it is indeed worrisome that the world is getting more and more polarized, and every country wants to go back to its deepest roots, because part of this discussion has to do with the original identity. Who were we before we were colonized? I mean, that's indeed an interesting debate, but we at politics, I mean, we've been under pressure by specific events like COVID or the financial crisis. Democracies are forced to react promptly and in a safe way for the population when facing such events. This has been the major challenge for democracy. I mean, democracy doesn't exist just for the sake of existing. Its main purpose is to satisfy the needs of the population and to provide the people with what they expect from the state. During the pandemic, we realized how fragile our democratic institutions are. We struggle with getting healthcare, drugs, medication. We've seen that everything was coordinated centrally to reach more widespread areas. Not long ago, there was an earthquake here in Morocco. We had a very strong earthquake in 2010 in Chile. I mean, and when facing such circumstances, you realize how tough it is when natural catastrophes strike you, because your population suffer, and they suffer a lot. So we need to discuss and to define what is best for the democracy of the future. And I totally agree with this vision. At the same time, we need to look at the present in order to be able to remove what gets on our way: populism, countries, beliefs, religions. And I think that is a challenge that is indeed very tough, arising from globalization, that can only be addressed, in my opinion, through a humanistic perspective that puts people and human beings at the center, leaving aside anything that is non-essential, even if this makes us going a bit slower.
Deliver, you say correctly, just having democracy for the sake of democracy without presenting the solutions that are having a meaningful impact on people's everyday life, of course, is fruitless. And if we look at it specifically in Europe anyway, Mats, of course, the one driving issue, and in the US in many ways as well, is of course the issue of immigration, of refugees. That is perhaps the number one fuel, if you will, that is igniting these populist movements in Europe first and foremost. I said before, we can dismiss these reactions as small-minded, as wrong, as xenophobic, but they do exist, and we ignore these concerns, or rather these sentiments, at our own risk, don't we?
You can say that, but I feel like pushing back a little bit.
Please do.
I think that the migration issue has been used by people who are half Democrats in Europe. And I'm not denying it's an issue, but we must, I want to leave the migration issue to the side. Look at what the European Union has done. People are not turning away from the European Union. The one country that did it, Britain, is suffering and wants back in, but doesn't know how to talk about it. And why did Ukraine impact Russia so much? Because Ukraine chose Europe, and Putin was afraid of losing his authoritarian logic if the neighboring countries who were in his sphere of influence earlier turned towards Europe. So you have had a complete vote of Ukraine for democracy because the European Union works. And why is therefore the European Union and NATO now joining forces? It is because that very democratic, liberal system is under threat from Putin. That's why it has to be defended in Ukraine. And I know that not everybody here perhaps believes this, but I can tell you that the emotion behind the Democrats in Europe comes from this. If you don't stand up now, they'll come for you later.
You need to stand up, and that's a point you have repeated with passion here on the stage, and I think very few would disagree. But the fact still remains. Now, you and I, we are maybe on the same page, but if I as a journalist go out on the street and I interview people, this is what they're telling me. This is what the misgivings are on the part of the people. They're saying our government is not doing enough for us. People who are coming into our country are getting treated better, are getting more privileged. So, you know, you and I, we can say these are all lies, but the fact is this is the fuel that populist movements are feeding off. The AfD in the country that I live in, Germany. Now, facing these and addressing these head on must be the task of democracies, isn't it?
Absolutely. If I may take the migration issue very quickly. There are three categories of migrants. There are the political refugees, which we built a system around. People who fled from non-democracies, from Chile to Sweden, for example. Then there are those fleeing wars.
Yes, yes.
We have to solve that by solving the conflicts. But then there are the economic migrants. The richer the global south is, the more migration pressure there will be, not the less. So we have to take this question and explain it to people and not be afraid of the question.
Former Minister, representing and living in France, I don't have to tell you that what we're discussing on stage, and I'm going to come to you as well, Laura, on this, it's a big issue in your country, of course. Marine Le Pen this is the number one and the most pertinent issue that she's been driving home for many, many years, resonating, judging by the polls, much more vividly and closely with the French public.
Alors, d'abord, je ne représente pas les institutions, hein. Je ne représente que moi, là.
Well, I represent myself in here, not the French institutions.
De xénophobie.
I don't think there's a xenophobia problem. It is a moralist diversion that is useless. It is a matter of figures. So a total of 20 million of Africans coming to Europe, they would say, welcome. I don't have a moralist approach to this. I think if we had managed the migration flows that we actually need in Europe, I don't know about other countries, but on the basis of what the Danish demographers are saying, maybe I will shock some people here. If we had managed this for the last 20, 30 years, the extreme movement would be doing half what they're doing. Marine Le Pen would be 12, 15 instead of being 40%. So this is what I believe. So after all those battles, the Europeans will have to adopt a system in which quotas per professional, per segment will be negotiated. We will actually solve the illegal immigration. And we should not actually mix with asylum. Asylum is not for people who want to live better. It is for to protect people whose life is in danger. And this is under the auspices of international conventions. You know, for racist problems, political problems. So we have to make a distinction between both. So today, asylum is totally diverted mafias, systems would draw more money from the diversions of asylum in Europe than drugs. So maybe in 15 years there will no longer be any asylum. And Madame Molonier is a moderate central right political leader. So I will be in favor of a serious negotiation. We could actually host people later and welcome them better. And we need to make sure that the most dynamic people, the strongest people who are leaving their countries, who are brain draining, we have to brain gain them, actually. And at a certain point, moral becomes immoral. So maybe I'm being too brutal here. So this is what I think. It is not something we cannot achieve or unachievable. There are a lot of countries in history that have managed this very properly. So we shouldn't have illusions. I don't think we should go back to the very radical movements. And in addition, in modern democracy, it is impossible to respond to everyone or to address the needs of everyone. A hyper-talented government and a very capable government will manage for 3 years to address the needs of maybe 40% of the people. So in Germany, you have 3 representative parties, but their popularity is only 20% in Germany. In France is a little better. So we cannot meet all the people's expectancies. It is impossible. You have to accept the ideas that even when democracies work perfectly well, they are imperfect. They are perfectly imperfect.
It's something we all know, but particularly looking at Europe, obviously the impact is getting closer. Poland has reversed course, but of course we have many other examples, such as the Netherlands, of course, with Geert Wilders, with Slovakia. All these countries are now heading into another direction. And by the way, as a German of Turkish citizen, nobody needs to convince me of the value of migration. But at the end of the day, Laura, there are some realities that we're facing today, and we know what the political discussion is being driven by. I know you wanted to jump in here.
Bueno, yo soy...
Well, I am from German and Spanish origins. Probably my ancestors migrated to Chile. Actually, when people claim that they want globalization and its positive effects, but they reject one of the effects, which is migration, you know, it's it strikes me a bit. And in Latin America, just recently, we've been under great migration pressure in Chile, in particular people coming from wars, from institutional and political conflicts in their country of origins, people fleeing.
Il est complexe de dire qu'il va falloir en fait mettre en place un ordre pour tout type de migration ou flux migratoire, car la chose qui se passe est la chose suivante. Alors, les personnes qui émigrent sont les personnes les plus pauvres, notamment les femmes et les enfants. Ce n'est pas n'importe quel migrant. Il y a une dimension féminine à cette migration. Il y a une migration féminine extrêmement importante en Amérique latine, qui est d'ailleurs accueillie par des pays qui, entre parenthèses, sont plus stables, avec des politiques sociales de protection de la maternité, la protection infantile, l'emploi des femmes. Alors il me semble ici qu'il y a un réel défi qui a trait avec des héritages historiques. Il y a un secteur de la population qui, historiquement, a été sous-valorisé, discriminé, et qui représente 52% de la population, qui, par hasard, sont les plus...
Vienen de sectores rurales, las que no accedieron a educación. Entonces hay un elemento de género que yo no quiero dejar de lado en este análisis de la migración y de la tensión que esto supone para los regímenes democráticos. Sí, nos vemos tensionados, pero sí es nuestra obligación hacer lo correcto para administrar esa tensión de la manera que sea correcta. Hace pocos días atrás el presidente de mi país, Gabriel Boric, inició una política de reintegro a sus países de origen de personas que habían cometido delitos en Chile. pero tiene una razón específica, no sé si me está escuchando, no necesariamente es la devolución por la devolución. Hay que buscar formas más humanas de conciliar la migración de los seres humanos. De nuevo, solo quiero terminar con una idea. La globalización lleva implícita la migración. No sé por qué nos sorprendemos tanto de ese fenómeno o nos gusta la globalización, todo de la globalización, menos la migración. No lo entiendo.
By the way, and I'm sure that goes for many in the audience, the last portion of your answer was not translated, at least not for me, but I made it out with my high school Spanish somehow. And the point, of course, you're driving home. And by the way, this is, of course, not a panel on migration, on refugees and all that, but it is on authoritarianism, democracy, and populism. And this is the language, this is the topics, these are the topics, these are the themes that many of the populist leaders are using as a vehicle to gain power. But many would say, Mats, perhaps, we can dwell on this all we want, but really, and this is not my argument, but some would make, this is a failure, if you will, even of globalization in many ways. They're saying the promises of economic growth has failed to materialize for far too many, something that fueled the debate preceding Brexit, of course. We do see inequality. We do see rising inequality. It's not an imagination. You worked for many years in the World Bank. You know that the gap is getting wider, and the democratic traditional parties don't seem to have an answer for that.
Oh, I disagree.
I'm glad.
I have to say please. Plainly, inequality in the world is reducing. But inequalities within nations are increasing. And of course, that's the territory where we call them populists in Europe, but where the authoritarians are fishing for votes. But it doesn't mean that the authoritarians have better answers than the Democrats. We have better answers, in my view. And there are many examples of where economics is working for the benefit of people, certainly in Morocco. And, okay, next year we will have elections for the European Parliament, in the United States, in India, and you can go on. These are extremely important tests where it's not just the Democrats against authoritarians, it's the test of the democratic institutions themselves. And, well, as I mentioned from the beginning, what happens in the United States is extremely important. Now, I believe in borders, so I'm not taking borders. Palestine, Israel is a question of border. Ukraine is a question of borders. The United States has a right to have a border to the south, but to have a policy in the United States of not really engaging with Central America and Latin America, I'm at a loss, because the European Union would never think like that. And even if we have failed with the Euromed, it's something that will come back forever and ever. We are simply neighbors. So it has to be resolved over time.
Let me ask you something, because you have bemoaned in the beginning that the rise of authoritarianism and liberal democracies is threatening individual liberty, pluralism, free markets, the rule of law, of course, the free press, liberal democracy, and so on and so forth. But of course, there are some arguments to play devil's advocate. The UAE, for instance, or Singapore, are commonly cited as very attractive models where strong authoritarian leaders have succeeded in creating economic growth and stability. These are not democracies, for lack of a better term.
But they are not models. They are successful, rich countries on the borders in very complicated geopolitical and geoeconomic way. So maybe you can be seduced to think that we all can be Singapore and UAE, and Britain thought it could, but Britain failed dismally. So if you are 500 million people like Europe is, and Ukraine wants to be desperately within the European Union. It is because of democracy and the social economic model. So I think that, you know, last year, fragmentation was the word that I brought home. And, well, I saw collaboration yesterday. I think collaboration is too weak a word. I think we need a democratic social contract as the basis of multilateralism going forward. And certainly if we are talking about Atlanticism.
Former Minister, I know you wanted to jump in here.
Bon, il y a beaucoup de sujets passionnants, mais
there are a lot of subjects full of passion. But let me recall everyone here that to everyone that when we talk about globalization, there are globalized and globalizing who have never the globalizers, some ideologies, some economic forces, and what we have lived through is an Americano globalization, an Americano deregulation, and also the people's escape from that. And we should not use globalization as being a scientific abstraction if we really want to work on how do we correct these things.
To the audience and open up the debates. Laura, some people, of course, are asking whether this global shift towards authoritarianism is a temporary deviation, or rather a lasting departure, if you will, from democratic principle. So the question is, can liberal societies still muster the strength and are capable of reversing this trend that we're seeing? The United States, must just mention, has a very, very crucial election coming up next year. So does India. Many countries are facing the democratic tests at a very critical juncture here. Do you think what we're talking about here, authoritarianism, in the rise of authoritarianism and populism in liberal democracies, when we look back in history books, is this going to be perceived as a temporary phenomenon, or is this here to stay?
No.
Well, I believe that this is cyclic, as the history of human beings has always been. You know, some things come and go, including bad alerts or impacts on democracy. We've seen some authoritarianism threatening democracy, coming both from the right and the left. Many anchor the mandates in the constitution to continue to be in power for 4 years more. And I think that is very dangerous and risky. We are undergoing through a historical moment that put a lot of pressure on countries, in particularly those that are less developed, and which are in particularly those facing the biggest challenges in terms of climate change, as it has been said in the COP. We are facing a high number of migrants, high percentage of poverty, the gender gap, just to mention a few of our issues. So yes, I want to be optimistic here. I believe this is a part of a cycle, and I think that it could be expected that Latin America and the countries in the South will be able to strengthen this South-to-South relationship and to come up with a new way of, a new construct, a new pact that helps us reshape history again, and that we are more coherent with our principles. I don't want to be portrayed here as an idealistic person, because I see that you people here are very pragmatic. But you know what happens since I started being involved in politics when I was 13 years old? To me, politics was a way of dreaming a new world. And I think that there are ways to involve more actors in this exercise of democracy, and the change of structures is of the essence.
Rightly so. The climate change as one of the biggest tasks and challenges that politicians have to tackle. Mats, the irony, of course, is that many of the populist authoritarian leaders are denying, or rather questioning, the science behind climate change. So clearly, with the rise of authoritarianism and populism, the likelihood of getting really formidable and sustainable deals done.
O cuestionando la pandemia.
Yes, or even questioning the existence of the pandemic. They also question the pandemic, right? The anti-vaccination movement. Many world leaders, including in Latin America, were against a vaccination. They denied the pandemic of COVID-19. So it is not only the climate change denial, they also deny other phenomena that affect this society.
Drowning out dissenting voices, particularly during the pandemic, I think, if any, has fueled many of the populist movements within Europe. But Mats, on the climate change front,
I'm 50-50 on what happened at the last COP. Progress, but not strong enough, obviously. But then again, I struggle with myself a little bit. I'm as convinced as anyone of the science of climate change, but I would pose to you that corruption within our countries might be the binding constraint in order for us to be able to move politics forward so that people can accept the trade-offs that inevitably are there on the difficult side. On the easy side, it's easy, but on the difficult side, it's not easy. And for that one, I think that the resentment in populations is more directed to the lack of law and the abundance of evidence of corruption than it is against democracy. That's my view, and I think I can prove it another time.
I'm not sure if the microphone there was quite working, but hopefully we can get this fixed. I'm going to, before we go to the audience, former minister, jump in here. I think the one thing that the danger, and Hillary Clinton has shown this prior to her election defeat to Donald Trump, calling those people voting for Trump, for Orban, for Geert Wilders, for you go down the list as deplorables, as people who lack knowledge, as people who are uneducated. I think that is not the right recipe here, is it, to reverse the trend? We must take these people serious at the end of the day. The condescension also on the part of many of the mainstream medias, I don't exempt myself here from their criticism.
Bon, il y a beaucoup de sujets gigantesques qui...
Of huge topics that are intertwined. What is sure is that we have to do the contrary of what Hillary Clinton did. It's not the main topic here. Suffice it to say that I remain very positive in the COPs. This is the very first time ever that we have been able to get from the oil and gas producers who said we have to develop, not relinquish the oil now, but for developing other areas. Let me remind you of the gigantic battle of Arabia against the conclusion. Conclusion is the best thought, unimaginable, unfathomable 15 days ago. I'm not saying, of course, the absolute priority is exiting from coal. The politicians have caused us to lose 20 years on a nuclear. They were obsessed on coal exiting calendar or timeline. This has to do with India. This also pertains to Russia, India, China, etc., other countries in Europe. But allow me, I did not address the question of authoritarianism, which was your question from the very inception. I think all in all, we can, even if it comes as a surprise, to have a good management of the migratory flows. Still, I have a big question on authoritarianism that translates into or reflects the need of authority. Even, let me tell you, in the most remarkable democracies, everyone is saying it's not going smoothly anymore. And societies are so piecemeal, atomized, communitarized, judiciarized, etc., etc., etc. So much so that the powers have been brought to almost nothing, that the ridicule and contentless situation has led to a need of authority. Since we have to reestablish the necessary authority, and all the topics that we've talked have come into the purview of authoritarians that we don't want. And I'm summarizing it here, but I'm not convinced as to the result that we may reach. I don't think that a direct quote-unquote democracy may be a good response to the crisis of representative democracy. But if we are all questioning ourselves on our devices as to whether the debt capital should be put again, are we going to confirm it tomorrow? It's monstrous. It's the dictatorship of everyone and anyone, and we cannot also kill the tyrants, because the tyrant is everywhere. We have to salvage democracy, but that we will not be able to do it without really making it functional, efficient, capable of not really looking at all results, but some of the results. And I have to acknowledge, in passing, this is not as obvious as it may seem.
Saying that we are discussing, if you will, many topics at the same time here, but as is the nature, if you are given a session that is titled Authoritarianism, Democracy and Populism, by definition, many of the issues that we have addressed here within the last 60 minutes here, of course, will be intertwined and are interconnected, as is the nature of these issues. Let's go to the audience. I'm sure we have some questions. I see. We have approximately 20 hands. Now, don't be mad at me if we don't get everyone in at the same time. And to help me and us get in as many people as possible, please be as brief and precise with your remarks. Starting here up front, please introduce yourself quickly, and please be as precise and brief as you can.
Jessica de Alba from Mexico.
And by the way, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Let's take notes, because I'm going to come back to you at the very end. We're collecting. Go ahead.
I don't know in which language to speak, so I'm going to switch to my mother tongue. Lo que han dicho todos.
Well, everything that the panelists have said are right in many senses, but I think that we should all accept that clearly democracy is failing, because those getting to power are convincing people, because they are lacking something. They lack many things, and I understand that democracy cannot respond to every need and every claim, but at the very least, it should respond to the most basic demands. This brings me to the crucial issue here, which is education. We are seeing, a very bad education. I mean, education is disappearing precisely because, or as a consequence of these authoritarians getting to power. And, governments go from right to left, from left to right, back and forth. Institutions are being weakened. What should we do? I mean,
let's mix up left-right, as I've done yesterday. We'll have the young lady here. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hey, this is Camila from Argentina. We know our recent president. We don't know yet what he's going to do. Just wanted to remind everyone, remember Gramsci said at some point, the old world refuses to die and the new world refuses to be born, and in the middle the monster is born. I feel like we're quite there. And in terms of democracy, Claude Lefort said, democracy is intrinsically about uncertainty. So we've gone to trying to train our citizens to be comfortable with uncertainty. That's part of democracy. But I'm getting this feeling, after working for 12 years in politics and in the social ground, that there's something that people are not really satisfied with. They want to be part of something. And democracy, for some reason, we're like getting really detached from that. We're not showing what they can be part of. And in Argentina, at least, people are so angry that they wanted a leader that's as angry as them. So they voted for someone who says, I'm going to use the chainsaw to just like destroy everything. And he says, viva la libertad, carajo, which is go freedom. I'm not going to say that because I'm polite, but another bad word. But people want to see they're part of something. And just to add on that, maybe I'm also seeing the world not as I expected it to be, but as it is right now. And many people are growing like more fond of local
right.
churches, religion, something that can give them meaning.
And I think that ability to present yourself as the advocate of the people, whatever that means, of the people's concern, I think is indeed a very major tool. Please be as brief as you can, very quickly.
Hi,
because we're going around the room. There are approximately 10, 15 people I have on my list.
Thank you, Ali. So my name is Maximo, I'm from Spain, and our speaker, Laura, talked about the need of including more actors in our democracies. But there are innovative democratic tools that do this, right? Tools like citizens' assemblies or mini-publics, whereby a cohort of citizens that is representative of the diversity of society undergoes a training and then decides, or at least advises, on a topic. Tools like open innovation processes, whereby we include a bunch of actors, which I believe, create more social cohesion and better solutions. So should countries be investing more in these approaches? And can they be a tool to combat, that separation, that populism and polarization? Thank you.
Wonderful. Can we get more questions? I think we've heard a lot of statements, remarks, a lot of insights. Can we get more questions?
Okay. My name is Mohamed Oulishki. I'm from
Mohammed.
I will begin by the question and maybe...
First the question, then the statement.
Exactly.
No, that's not...
Is it a crisis of democracy or is it a crisis of democrats? Because democracy is an ideal. Democracy is, for me, as a citizen, giving up my inherent rights, provided that the state will provide me with public goods. Yeah. Basically, this is the idea. Today, I think that me as a citizen and others do not identify themselves with those who are supposed to represent them. I'm not talking about the issue of gender, and I'm not talking about representation of the youth.
Right. Thank you.
So is it a crisis of democracy or a crisis of democracy?
I'm very happy to hear the answers from our distinguished panelists. Go ahead, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcos from Nicaragua. I'm part of the Advertic Atlantic Leaders. In order to have a functioning democracy, wouldn't you agree that we need to have free press, freedom of expression, transparency, rule of law, and also allow the people to have dissenting opinions? Wouldn't you also agree that in order to have those things, we need to set clear institutions for acting democratic members in society to avoid, for example, cult of personality and propaganda? And second point, wouldn't you agree that we have, or in the West, or in my country, in the region, singled out the needs of the population or the electorate for security, for safety, for education, and the public goods, as some of you have mentioned?
Thank you. Please pass on the mic to the gentleman while we have the young lady here with the next question. That's how I'm going to conduct.
Hello everyone, my name is Amina and I'm going to switch to French for a second. Monsieur le Ministre.
Mr. Minister, I was asking myself the question. I was asking you, I'm here. The first question, we haven't heard you talk about the upsurge on the French, anti-French sentiment that has also made France perception different in this country. And what do you think of the reaction of the French government and the French Foreign Affairs Ministry together say? Do you think that it really reflects this populism? Secondly, my second question, yes, as a matter of fact, for me, considering that there's no xenophobia or parophobia, is rather FX. Science fiction, and maybe it is widely because of the media and the reality of the media management. Don't you think that the CSA is now playing, of course, the role of a court and not as democratic body of our media?
Before we go back to the panel, just if you haven't raised your hand by now, please refrain from doing so. Already, we have too many people that it will be impossible to incorporate everyone. Please go ahead.
So, Ettore Greco from the Institute of International Affairs. In discussing the main structural factors, they are eroding consensus in democracy, also undermining political system. You place a great emphasis on output legitimacy, the declining output legitimacy, and particularly the difficulty government are having in meeting basic requests and needs of the population, including on issues such as migration and also equality. Now, the issue is also the one of input legitimacy. So what we have seen is a weakening role of intermediary corps and bodies, including labor organization, even the political parties. They are provided, especially in the past.
Can we get a question?
A fundamental channel between the government and population. So what type of new participatory mechanism you would envisage? There have been many attempts, but most of them have been unsuccessful, also on the part of democratic leaders, as you know, such as referendums, etc.
Thank you so much, sir. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. I'm doing a PhD related to this topic. The primary explaining factor for populism is not migration, it's not inequality, it's not culture. It is a lack of social mobility. That is the primary driving factor. So yes, indeed, we need a new social pact, as you rightly mentioned. But what would that look like? How do we improve? How do we stop populism if the causes are systemic? Thank you.
Go ahead. Somebody has the microphone.
Jean-Claude Meyer, Vice Chairman International for Rothschild Bank. There is a globalization of populism today. There is a wave at the same time everywhere. In Argentina today, after Bolsonaro, after Trump, tomorrow probably Le Pen. So what is the main reason? Is it that?
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Andreas Krämer, founder of Ecologic Institute. Thank you for your clear words, Mats. Could you give us your sense of the role of dark money, whether it comes from Putin or whether it comes from the fossil industry, the Koch brothers, as they try to undermine governments and their ability to regulate them? And to Hubert Védrine, you have said that it's a crisis of representative democracy. Isn't it a crisis of the first past the post electoral system in the case of Brexit, Britain, the last country that has that electoral system? And could you differentiate between parliamentary democracies and presidential democracies?
All right, thank you so much. We'll take a couple more and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Vemba Pezo Dizolele, CSIS Africa, Washington, D.C. I've listened to the presentation, which were great, but I hear the word democracy a lot. I have not a single time heard the word governance. In fact, what we're talking about, institutions are just building and people. What Singapore has is good governance. What China is doing is governance. They may not be democracy. This is particularly to Matt Carlson. I think there's a Western obsession with the word democracy and election and so on. It's not worked in Mali. It's not worked in the Sahel. It's not worked nowhere in Africa where we've put a lot of money into elections and not into democracy. We're trying to put governance, in election and not into governance. We're trying to put governance into Ukraine. We've not done any such thing anywhere in the African basin, part of the Atlantic basin. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Zuzana Podracka. I work for the Ministry of Education of Slovakia, and my question is really quite simple because I was struck by quite a few comments about how politics used to be about getting people excited about something new. What do you propose that we do about those populations who, quite frankly, are not excited about what is coming and they would rather go back to the old world because, especially in Central Europe, where democracies are really quite new and fragile, the democratic experience has been crisis after crisis after crisis, and they don't really have the energy to face what is coming with optimism. Thank you very much.
Former Minister, in the interest of finishing up on time here, I know we could have gone to at least 10, 15 more, I'm sure very valuable inputs and questions, but as is time is limited. I know you've taken diligent notes. Address the questions that you think are best suited.
So I am unable to answer all of the questions. And there are many interesting comments and remarks, but that are not questions. So I will maybe focus on a few points that have been raised. So first of all, on xenophobia. If this is shocking, well, so be it. I'm not here to be applauded. This is xenophobia. It's due to xenophobia that these attacks happened during François Hollande's term, and there hasn't been a single racist incident. When we talk about xenophobia, if you study history, this is completely unrelated with what's taking place in the most shocking times in the shifts in opinions in Europe. And I'm reacting here because the implication shocked me. For Sahel, France is a scapegoat. I'd like to recall who invented France-Africa. This became mandatory to announce the end of France-Africa. It's Houphouët-Boigny who invented France-Africa with the support of Senghor, and France sort of stayed at the request of Africans and intervened even at the time of Hollande at the request of Africans. But given that we are in a juncture, once again, I don't really believe in the global south, but there seems to be this post-Western move or trend. But when there are corrupt governments that try to find a scapegoat, well, the Westerner in this region is France, and the rest have disappeared. The Belgians have left a horrible situation in Rwanda and Burundi and the Congo. They disappeared from one day to, from the landscape. The Portuguese also left some horrors in Angola and Mozambique. They also disappeared. The British also left many civil wars where they colonized and they disappeared. Well, France sort of, it's the brave idiot, sort of stayed around. If these countries believe that to address their issues of the future and address the youth, well, be more successful in doing so with the Chinese and the Russians, well, good luck to them. It will be their problem and no longer ours. We could reinvent a sort of normal cooperation, partnerships, actually. As for consultative democracy, I'd like to come back to my issue here. So this representative democracy is threatened. It is threatened by impossible to satisfy expectations. People want to pay less taxes. They want more hospitals. So this is impossible. So it is a democratic representative democracy that's under attack. So it seems that there is a sort of consultative democracy that's being developed. There might be even a sort of blind dictatorship. So what's the sort of in-between is this consultative democracy. So those who come to these conventions tend to be activists. They ask for maximist things that governments cannot deliver on, and then people feel betrayed. So I'm not against a consultative democracy, unless it will destroy representative democracy. And this might seem archaic or has been, but we can't find any solutions to current issues if we don't do that. Also, I do think that we need to curb populism, even if we cannot define it. But to condemn and to fight populism are two different things. If all of the elites condemn, if the elite that everyone is rejecting condemn, populism, well, this is beneficial to populism. This is what we saw in France with the Rassemblement National. So we need to address the root causes. But what's interesting is that lots of these interactions or the questions were about causes. So the roundtable, I would say, was quite interesting in this regard.
Bien, de nuevo hay muchas preguntas.
Well, again, many questions have been raised, and I think that the problem is not the ideas. It's those who, put those ideas into practice. We, people in democracy, have failed. We've made mistakes. Maybe we didn't orientate ourselves in the right direction, and I fully agree that, at least in our countries in Latin America, education should be a focus of interest every day in order to define the character of our population. I still believe, though, that democracy, you can call it the name you wish, governance or democracy. I think it's impossible to exert any governance with no democracy. I couldn't conceive a group led by a group of people or a reduced number of people. At the end of the day, if they perform well, if they deliver, I don't care. What I want is that I am able to decide who governs me. Now, on participatory democracy, let me remind you that many of the events according or as a result of which participatory instruments were implemented had a social origin. In Chile, for example. And what did we have earlier? I think it was Anne who said that people are longing for the past, not the present. Well, definitely no. When I got involved in politics, I was very young, and the government in my country would torture and murder people. That's not what we have today, and I still prefer the democracy we have today, with the questions we have about it and with its failures and weaknesses. I think that corruption, as it has been said here, at least when linked to Latin American democracies, puts us at the forefront and forces us to outdo ourselves. We work at the National Oil Company to create a company, a mother company for green hydrogen, but at the same time, I mean, people have to eat. We have to ensure pensions. I mean, it is not an easy task to govern. And, well, I would compare it to, juggle different balls at the same time, right? As jugglers do. We should be able to constrain expectations, but respond to the needs. And there are threats, of course, like authoritarianism. But the future that is to come is going to be much better than one we had after the pandemic that devastated the world.
Now, Mats, you have proven yourself to be a fierce and passionate defender of democracy and Democrats. I'm looking forward to your final remarks.
Is it working?
I think it is.
Good. All right. So I love the discussion. So, those of us who are passionate about democracy have never tried to say that democracy is easy. It is really difficult. It's just better than the rest. And I don't understand the question. Obviously, I like the term governance. That's a very good term to use for strategy, for strategic policy making. Karim, you made a great introduction yesterday. And one of the things you said was, we need methodology. We cannot just be agreeing on the purposes. We need to work it through in strategic policy planning. That's governance. But to take from there a conclusion that Africa doesn't want to be democratic runs completely against 30, 40 years of my professional experience and living in Africa. Of course, there can be different views. We will go through transitions back and forth, but the desire to live with human rights is universal. And if it is universal, I believe it is universal. So I think, the idea that I think people are running a little bit too fast in saying that it's a crisis of democracy. We have economic and social challenges, for sure, and believe me, that's where I've spent my life arguing. But to say that Trump, for example, is somehow responding to people who are disadvantaged is really delusional. What is Trump doing? It's the biggest con game in the world. He is spending American tax and public expenditure on the rich people and fooling the poor people. That is what is happening. So obviously we need to deliver, but democracy can deliver, and it is absolutely impossible to get rid of corruption if you don't apply the rule of law and justice and do these things. So the social and economic agenda is so big, but I'm sure we wouldn't disagree there. But I just don't think that Democrats are as weak as we are being presented as being. So Democrats with a small d.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, authoritarianism, democracy, and populism today. I think I can't speak for all. It was the expected, thought-provoking debate that our three outstanding speakers here have presented, evident by really the numerous calls to get a word in. Apologies to those whom I wasn't able to call upon due to time constraints, but I think everything you've said touched a nerve, obviously, with this audience, and I'm sure beyond. This is an issue we will be answering for and tackling for many, many more years, if not decades to come. Suffice to say, Hubert Vedrin, Laura Albornoz, and Mats Carlsen, you've been wonderful. This is your applause. Much appreciated.
Muchas gracias.
And before we part here, my esteemed and distinguished colleague Nick Gowan has a quick announcement.
Distinguished and esteemed Ali as well. We remember just over 24 hours ago, I had a town hall in here. It was an extraordinary experience with a lot of ideas. And picking up what Ali has just been saying, these are ideas we want to keep taking forward. How bold, how radical have you been? How bold an idea needs to still be put on the agenda. So come back from coffee in 20 minutes. If you have ideas and want to put them forward, we don't want to leave them until take-off tomorrow afternoon. We want to address them now for half an hour. Yeah. So come back from your orange, your water, and your coffee.
And the good thing is, Nick, I was not able to call on so many people, so you're going to pick it up from where we left off.
I've got their names.
That's wonderful. Excellent. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a coffee break and reconvene in this ballroom in 20 minutes. Thank you.
Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 400 high-level participants will gather from more than 80 countries to delve into this year's theme, a more assertive Atlantic, its meaning for the world. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 380 talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org.